the house, the $3 million inheritance, and the director's position will all go to my husband, the eldest son.
Jenny came marching into my living room as soon as she heard that a lawyer had arrived to discuss Tom's inheritance. Jenny, who had been pestering me for the inheritance and acting arrogantly, had probably been waiting eagerly for this day. Watching her approach the lawyer sitting across from me, the old me might have yelled at her in anger. But now, I was curious to see what she would say next. Then, she said something even greedier than I had expected, and I clapped my hands and laughed. The lawyer, who was also dumbfounded, added to my amusement, and I couldn't stop laughing at her brazen attitude. Jenny, clearly displeased, shot me a cold look. "Do you really think you'll get my husband's inheritance? Really?" Jenny's attitude, focused solely on money, made me snort with laughter. When she pointed at Chris, who had just arrived, and barked,
"My husband has the right to inherit."
I finally decided to tell her the truth. My name is Sarah, and I am 65 years old. I was a dedicated housewife, supporting my husband Tom, who worked tirelessly as a doctor. Even after he became the hospital director, he continued to work as an active doctor. We were blessed with a son who followed in his father's footsteps to become a doctor. Life wasn't without its challenges, but it was fulfilling. Tom passed away at 68, a man who truly lived his life for medicine. I believe his hard work finally took its toll, but at his funeral, I could see that he had lived without regrets. Many mourned Tom's passing, and the funeral was crowded with colleagues, supervisors, and subordinates. We even received many condolences from former patients. For me, my days had always been about seeing Tom off to work, but seeing how beloved he was by so many made me realize that I hadn't been wrong in supporting him all these years. Among the mourners, however, was Jenny, my eldest son's wife, who was smiling from ear to ear, as if she were happy about Tom's death. I overheard her saying terrible things during a conversation with relatives.
"Father-in-law was such a workaholic, right? I bet he saved up a lot of money because he didn't have time to spend it."
Hearing such words, I couldn't believe my ears. Even during the funeral, she seemed more focused on how Tom's inheritance would be divided. She probably didn't even realize that as a daughter-in-law, she had no right to inherit anything. But her behavior, completely inappropriate for the occasion, made me frown. Chris, my eldest son, gently approached me, clearly embarrassed by his wife's behavior.
"Mom, I'm sorry about Jenny. She just doesn't listen."
"It's not your fault. But if you feel that way, you should tell her to be more respectful." Even before this, I had known about Jenny's behavior. When I was busy with the funeral arrangements, she came over to our house, but instead of helping, she only asked about Tom's inheritance.
"Mom, since you're the wife, please don't waste Dad's inheritance, okay?"
"Is that really all you came to say?"
"Well, since you don't have much time left, it would be troublesome if you spent it all, right?"
Her words, as if Tom's money was her own, made me both angry and astonished. She even looked down on me, constantly making snide remarks. I had no idea why she disliked me so much, but her behavior had been a constant source of frustration. Chris, like his father, was a doctor. While Chris wasn't struggling financially, Jenny had always been obsessed with money. She often called me to hint that they needed financial help. We'd never gotten along because of this. So when Jenny started eyeing Tom's inheritance, my patience was wearing thin.
Chris's income is really unstable. We can't even afford to be extravagant.
Then maybe you should get a job and help with the household finances.
What? A wife working? That's ridiculous. Haha. You're so lucky, Mom, living comfortably because your husband earns so much.
No matter what I said, Jenny's attitude only worsened. She seemed determined to insult both me and her own husband, Chris, just to get her way. Jenny's disrespectful behavior toward family and her hypocrisy had always bothered me. Her greed was so obvious that I had to remind her that the inheritance process takes time. But she just kept pestering me about it, acting as if the inheritance was already hers. Not only was her attitude towards family, even though we were in-laws, unacceptable, but what I really couldn't stand was how she completely ignored her own actions, acting as if she had done nothing wrong. That's right, thanks to my husband, I've been able to live comfortably. Why don't you try respecting your husband a little more?
I would, if there was anything worth respecting. Anyway, I'm off to get my nails done. Don't forget about the inheritance, okay?
After saying whatever she wanted, Jenny quickly left. Her behavior was like a storm, and I couldn't help but worry about how Chris was being treated at home. But Jenny's outrageous attitude didn't stop there. Even during the inheritance process, she continued her bad behavior, and it was a terrible sight. After the funeral, Jenny frequently came over, repeatedly asking, "Is the inheritance ready yet?" like a parrot. No matter how many times I told her that the process takes time, she would conveniently forget and keep pressuring me as if she had just remembered. Even though I had told her before that she had no authority whatsoever, Jenny just let it go in one ear and out the other. I wasn't sure if she planned on taking Chris's share or if she had some other scheme, but Jenny was firmly convinced that a large sum of money would eventually come her way. She had probably made some sort of agreement with Chris to get a portion of the inheritance. If that was all, I would have kept quiet. However, Jenny's bad behavior didn't stop there. She even started taking valuable items from our home without permission. Hey! That's my necklace. What do you think you're doing? Wearing it without permission?
Oh, come on. We're family, so let's get along.
I refuse to get along with a thief.
In that case, consider it an advance on the inheritance. After all, I'm being patient with you, aren't I?
No matter how many times I told her to stop doing things without permission, Jenny refused to listen to me. After she took Tom's necklace without my consent, I couldn't tolerate it anymore, and I stopped letting her into the house, even if she showed up unexpectedly. Chris would continue to apologize, saying, "I'm sorry about Jenny," but he never actually stopped her, so I didn't have any expectations from him. I didn't even have time to feel upset about not getting back the necklace Tom had given me, as Jenny's malicious harassment continued. When I stopped letting her into the house, Jenny started spreading rumors to her friends, saying, "That evil mother-in-law won't even let me in when I try to visit." The neighbors who knew me well just gave me sympathetic smiles and said things like, "You must be going through a tough time." Still, I couldn't help but wonder why I had to be hated this much, and I held my head in frustration. The final straw was a strange envelope I found in our mailbox. It had already been opened, and I felt uneasy looking at it. It turned out to be a piece of mail addressed to Chris and Jenny. Apparently, out of spite for not being allowed into the house, Jenny had started putting her credit card bills in our mailbox. The bill detailed expensive dinners and ridiculous amounts spent on online shopping, and it made me feel sick. Jenny's credit card bill was in our mailbox. What's going on?
I don't know. Don't ask me about it.
And Jenny's been living quite lavishly, hasn't she? She's always saying your income is tight. Is this okay?
About that. I'm really in a tough spot right now. Sorry, Mom, but could you pay this bill for us?
I called Chris to give him a piece of my mind, but instead, he said something so outrageous that I was left speechless, shaking my head in disbelief. Why would he think I would help them? He couldn't even return what his wife had stolen from me. It seemed Chris only remembered the things that were convenient for him, so I scolded him firmly. The financial help I was giving you too is already over. You're both adults now, so why are you still burdening your parents?
But hey, there's still Dad's inheritance, right? You can't possibly use it all yourself, so why not help us out a bit?
You're unbelievable. This is exactly what they mean by the saying, thieves are bold. You and Jenny really are a perfect match. Don't contact me again. Even over the phone, I could tell Chris was grinning nonchalantly, which only made me raise my voice as I scolded him. After I hung up, I immediately threw the bill in the trash. The thought that Jenny had deliberately put it in our mailbox for me to pay made me dizzy with disbelief at her shamelessness. Could it be that she really thinks she's going to get the inheritance? What should I do, Tom? I asked this out loud, holding Tom's picture. The anger and disappointment I felt toward my son and his wife were so overwhelming that I didn't know whether to be furious or just give up entirely. Could I really proceed with the inheritance process like this? A feeling of uncertainty crept over me, but I resolved to push forward, hoping that one day they would face the consequences of their actions. Even as I proceeded with the process, dealing with the horrendous behavior of my son and daughter-in-law, I felt alone. But then, I found something, Tom's will, which he had left behind. Reading it gave me the resolve I needed to get back at them. Thank goodness. You really were on my side, weren't you? Looking at Tom's will, I regained my composure. There was no way I was going to just sit back and let them manipulate me. Clenching my fists, I decided that I would strike back at Chris and Jenny when the time was right. Feeling empowered by the thought of retaliation, I forgot all about Jenny's credit card bill. I never intended to do anything about it anyway, but when Jenny noticed I hadn't taken care of it, she called me again. Even though the inheritance process wasn't yet finished, she kept saying things like, "You're just dragging this out because you want to keep everything for yourself." She continued to insult and berate me over the phone.
The reason I have to keep waiting is because you won't hand over the inheritance. Since I'm being patient, the least you can do is take care of that card bill I left in your mailbox.
Cut the nonsense. Why do you think you're entitled to any of this money in the first place?
What do you mean why? Chris is the eldest son. Obviously, he's entitled to inherit.
Jenny laughed as if I were clueless, mocking me for my supposed ignorance. Yes, traditionally, the eldest son would inherit, and she was right in that sense. But even though Jenny had said all this, I still hadn't told either of them the most important detail. They should have known it themselves, as it concerned them directly, but they were too wrapped up in their selfish assumptions to figure it out. I waited eagerly for the perfect moment to crush the two of them. And finally, that moment came. It was when I explained the situation to the lawyer and arranged for his assistance at the conclusion of the inheritance process. After finalizing the arrangements with the lawyer, I contacted Chris. It was supposed to be a routine notification, but, as expected, Jenny eagerly rushed to our house in excitement. On this day, I intentionally left the front door unlocked, and, as usual, Jenny opened the door without hesitation and walked right in, without any doubt. Watching her brazenly enter, I had to suppress a laugh.
Finally. I've been waiting forever. You've been delaying the process, Mom, and refusing to hand over the inheritance.
What brings you here, Jenny?
Is that the lawyer? I'm Jenny, the wife of your son.
Ignoring me completely, Jenny swiftly approached the lawyer sitting across from me. Normally, I would have voiced my frustrations, but I held back and waited for her to speak. I was honestly curious about what this brazen woman would say next.
The house, the $3 million in inheritance, and the director's position will all go to my husband, the eldest son.
Excuse me?
Jenny's greed went beyond anything I could have imagined, and I burst into laughter, clapping my hands. The lawyer's stunned expression only fueled my amusement, and I couldn't stop laughing at her audacity. Naturally, Jenny wasn't pleased and gave me a cold, displeased look.
What are you laughing at? Are you so upset about losing the inheritance?
Where did you even come up with $3 million? How did you arrive at that figure?
Your husband was a doctor for many years, right? It's obvious he must have saved that much. Unless you've already spent it all, that is.
Her obsessive focus on money made me snicker once again. Even though it was my inheritance, and no one had any right to question what I did with it, Jenny couldn't stand the idea of me having it.
I warned you, didn't I? I told you not to make any reckless decisions since you don't have much time left.
I can't believe you have the nerve to say that to your in-law. I've been warning you all along that you have no right to the inheritance. Wearing the necklace she had stolen from me, Jenny glared at me, trying to assert her dominance. But I wasn't going to give her an inch. This selfish, greedy woman wasn't going to win. Jenny pointed to Chris, who had just arrived, and shouted,
My husband has the right to inherit as the eldest son.
At this moment, I finally decided it was time to tell them the truth. There's no inheritance for either of you. Isn't that right, Chris?
Huh? Why?
You really don't remember? That's unbelievable.
Are you still going on about that? That was all dealt with a long time ago.
How can you think it's over when you never made amends for it?
What are you talking about? What's this about?
Jenny seemed completely clueless, and I was astonished by her ignorance. It appeared that she hadn't even considered the consequences of their actions. So, I calmly began to explain everything to the two of them. A few years ago, Chris married Jenny. But before that, Chris had been married to another woman, with whom he had a child. Instead of taking care of his family, Chris had an affair with Jenny and ended up marrying her. This scandal came to light when Chris cried to Tom, unable to pay the alimony and child support to his ex-wife.
I never imagined you'd be this irresponsible. What were you thinking?
I had no choice. Marrying Jenny was the only option.
At the very least, take responsibility for your actions. I won't give you any money.
Come on, Dad. You've been a doctor for so long. You've got money to spare.
Hearing this, Tom's patience finally snapped. Chris, already overwhelmed with the costs of starting his new life and paying for the wedding, started making excuses. But Tom decided to sever ties with Chris, choosing to protect his grandson instead.
Fine. I'll pay for your mistakes, but it's not for you. It's for my grandson. He doesn't deserve to suffer because of his father.
You don't have to say it like that.
But don't expect another cent from me. I won't give you anything. You won't get a penny of my inheritance either.
At the time, Chris didn't take Tom seriously, thinking it was just an empty threat. However, Tom stuck to his word. He even refused to attend Chris and Jenny's wedding, saying, "How can you expect me to celebrate a man who abandoned his family?" After that, Tom cut them off financially for good.
Come on, Dad, be reasonable. One day, you'll need me to take care of you. We're family, so let's just get along.
I won't need you. I'd rather die than rely on you.
Chris, knowing his parents were wealthy, tried to hint at future caregiving in an attempt to gain financial support. But Tom didn't budge. As promised, Tom made sure that Chris and Jenny wouldn't receive a dime of the inheritance. His will specified that everything would go to me and his grandson from Chris's previous marriage. Tom was a traditional and strict man, and he made thorough preparations to ensure that not even a single dollar would go to Chris and Jenny. I realized this when the lawyer showed me Tom's will during the funeral arrangements. I recalled my anger from back then and felt grateful to Tom for protecting us.
So, as per Tom's will, Chris does not have any rights to inherit his estate.
The lawyer read out Tom's will, and Chris and Jenny were left stunned. Seizing the moment, I turned to Jenny with a final blow. "By the way, when you were taking things from our house, was that supposed to be an advance on the inheritance?"
Well.
You heard the lawyer. "You have no rights to anything, so I expect you to return everything you took." I pointed to the necklace Jenny was wearing. She glared at me in frustration, but, with the lawyer present, she had no choice. With a click of her tongue, she tossed the necklace back at me.
This is ridiculous. I wouldn't have come today if I had known we weren't getting the inheritance.
Oh, really? You acted so smug when you came to announce your marriage. I thought you knew all along. I remembered how furious I had been with Jenny's arrogance when she first came to announce her marriage to Chris. I had once thought my son had been deceived by this woman, but now I realized they were a perfect match.
I'm not giving up on the inheritance. What about the hospital? The director's position? Who's going to inherit that?
Sorry to disappoint you, but Tom already passed that down to a capable subordinate.
What? That's ridiculous. The child should inherit it.
You're facing the consequences of your own actions. It's all your fault. Desperate for anything, Jenny demanded the lawyer tell her what she could get, but he remained calm and simply told her there was nothing left for her. Tom had made sure of that in his will.
This can't be happening. It's completely unfair.
Oh. Are you going to take this to court? Feel free to embarrass yourself if you want. Jenny, furious and red-faced, stomped out of the house, her footsteps loud and heavy. Chris followed behind her. After they left, I held Tom's necklace in my hand and made a small victory gesture. Jenny never contacted me again, and the inheritance process went smoothly. I had been worried that they might try to approach my grandson, but Chris, who couldn't even afford child support, never made any contact. I heard later that Chris and Jenny's marriage was on the rocks because they didn't receive the inheritance. Jenny reportedly said to Chris, "I only married you because I thought we'd get a fortune." They were now on the verge of divorce. Chris called me once, demanding, "Give me part of the inheritance or the house." I just laughed and told him, "Come back to me when you wake up from your dream," and hung up. Although I sighed at my son's foolishness, I recently received some good news. It was a letter from Chris's ex-wife, thanking me for the inheritance. She included a picture of my grandson and a letter about how grateful they were for the support.
We feel so fortunate to have had such wonderful grandparents. Thank you for everything.
My grandson was growing up happily with his new father, and that letter brought a smile to my face. I read it aloud in front of Tom's picture, happy to finally give him good news about the grandson he cared so much about. Please subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video.